And I'm going to invite our next panel up. This panel is called Reinventing the Live Shot. And our moderator today is someone who has been with us as a panelist many times before, including at News Tech Forum, I believe, a number of times. And that is Mike Foss, who is a technology and workflow consultant with EverForward Strategies. He will, in just a moment, introduce his panelists for our next discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Michael mentioned, my name is Mike Foss, and with me today on the panel to my left is, sorry, I have to look, Ernie Ensign, Senior Director, News Technology with Sinclair Broadcast Group. To his left, Rich Pileski, Director of Operations for WCBS. And then Ben Ramos, VP of Fox, Archive, Field, and Emerging Technology. And then finally, Tim Stevens, Global Leader, Strategic Innovation for Sports, Media, and Entertainment for Verizon Business Group. Okay, we will jump right in here. So we have several topics we're going to hit on here on this panel today. We're going to start off by talking about news vehicles. So Rich, I'm going to start with you. Can you explain, so when I say news vehicles, I mean, the vehicles that your journalists are taking out every day.
Mm-hmm.
How did news vehicles undergo change due to the pandemic?
Well, I think if in 2019, any one of us here had gone to our coworkers and said, here's our plan for how to operate during a massive global infectious pandemic, we probably would have gotten laughed out of the room. But of course, because of COVID, those news vehicles became an isolated, powered, conditioned, climate controlled, familiar operating area where we could put a photographer and talent and use it as a mobile edit booth, as a way of going live. So really what the big difference I saw was because we couldn't have access to our facilities, right? We didn't have the staff. We didn't have the ability of getting a lot of people into those TV stations. What do you need? You need a remote edit facility that has transmission, climate controlled. So news vehicles became, especially the trucks, became how we produce a lot of our news, how we edited it. We had to, before anybody could report to work, people had to go through a telehealth system, make sure that they took their temperature, make sure they reported if they had any symptoms, and then they could, report either to a live truck or to a location. And we would keep the photogs and the talent together just in case there was an outbreak. Everybody would isolate together, and that was all, most of it in a news vehicle.
Yeah, to Rich's point, we, in addition to adding partitions to the vehicles, they're doing everything, but luckily everybody was doing everything at home as well. So we had a lot of enabling technologies that we're utilizing for them, and the 60 home studios that we had to light up, in a week. And, it was definitely a challenge, but all of those enabling technologies were a benefit to the field too. So now they're seeing prompter, and they're seeing return, and they're seeing the entire IPTV network. So it was, I think it was great for them in some ways, but definitely a challenge. And thrown into the mix there is that, maybe we lit some stuff up a little too quickly, and maybe we had some infosec problems that we did jump on, just as quickly. So, there was those challenges, but I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more later.
Yeah, and I think because I know you guys in particular, you guys were toying with a lot of new ways of actually creating, producing, pushing news out. And I think what we saw probably across the board was the acceleration of a lot of that innovation very quickly. And where there were tests going on, and we'll trial this, all of a sudden,
do it.
Just do it.
Yeah,
just do it.
It was beautiful in that respect.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. Well,
yes.
yeah, there was no, there's no slowing it down. So it actually was great. So
Yep.
Yeah, good points. Ernie, so let's talk about microwave trucks, satellite trucks. So typically stations, have at least a microwave truck, maybe a satellite truck. For each of your stations, what are you seeing as far as the usage of these vehicles go, and any changes to technology used in them?
Yeah, over the last few years, we've made a transition to more IP-centric trucks. It's undeniable that microwave trucks are not in use as much anymore, and we try to take these tools, these trucks, and turn them into other types of ways to transmit signals back. As Rich sort of talked about, they're a great place that you can sort of camp people out, whether you've got, especially in our large markets like DC, where you've got inaugurations and large scale events and, craziness that can happen down there. You've got this tool that, can be a production tool. It has a lot of benefits that it can bring. And we certainly don't think that they're, going to completely go away, but we want to reinvent them. How can we combine them with bonded cellular or, KA band or KU band IP type, streams that turn the tool into a sort of future-proofed tool. And then we're also looking at some ways that, we want to, leverage 2 gigahertz in the future, because you have this very valuable resource. And it's not getting used as much anymore. And what happens to a resource that's not getting used? Either the FCC wants to come in and take it and use it for somebody else, or, no offense to Verizon, they want that valuable spectrum. So it is something we need to protect. So we've looked at some mesh networks, especially in large markets like DC, where can we build some kind of mesh network using 2 gig around the National Mall? And whether the radio is, as an encoder, doing some kind of H.264 or HEVC, or it just being a companion tool to, bonded cellular, where it becomes a network. Okay, you go into some large scale event and, the cell bandwidth is just saturated because, Verizon just doesn't have enough there. And there's some questions on whether 5G is going to solve that, immediately as well. So take your cellular band, your bonded cellular, combine it in with your mesh network, and now you've got, some other signal paths there. So, we're trying to take the tools sort of into the next century.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting what you're doing with the mesh network, and I thought that was something that people would really want to hear about. So, no, thanks for sharing that. And as it relates to 2 gigahertz, Rich, how about you?
Well, just like Ernie mentioned, we actually use 2 gig less. 2 gig in your truck, that's half of the solution. You need somebody back at the studio to acquire that signal. And during a pandemic, when you have limited staff, what are you going to have that technical person in your TV station doing? Do you want them acquiring a bunch of 2 gig signals, or do you want them bringing in files and much more content from the field a different way? So we used hotspots a lot more, LTE. What we noticed was during the pandemic, the cell sites were pretty lightly loaded, and things like bonded cellular and just normal backhaul with an LTE upload to, let's say, a Dropbox worked a lot better than we thought it would, just because we weren't really competing for cell sites, because most of the people were in their homes. And we also found out, because there weren't many people on the roads, it was pretty easy just to drive the content back to the station. During those first 3 or 4 weeks of the pandemic, there was practically nobody on the road, no traffic. We could move a whole lot of content from a hard disk right back to the TV station just by driving it, and it was faster than an LTE upload.
At full quality.
Yeah.
Right.
For us, 2 gig kind of melted away over the years, utilizing bonded cellular to its credit. We still have a 7 gig DC National Mall presence on a few buildings. So, for those inauguration and those huge events. We tried mesh, it worked great, you know, and then it's so much, I don't know, it's so much infrastructure, and you kind of have to have, you know, the buy-in from everybody within that DMA. And it's just, you know, those calls, I remember trying a few of those calls, and then just at the end of it, I was just like, maybe not. So we've been leaning very, very heavily, you know, with, you know, bonded cellular, and, you know, very hopeful about, you know, FirstNet and Verizon Priority, and, you know, small amounts of QoS from cellular providers. That's, I think, our real hope.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just to comment, Ernie, on what you said, I think what we're going to find is it's a spectrum management challenge, really. And, you know, we are seeing more complex workflows, video workflows in everything that we do. And so spectrum's not going to, we'll figure out how to reuse, you know, the 2 gigahertz spectrum. I don't know what that use case will end up being, but, you know, that really is the challenge. I think Kurt was talking about it earlier. You know, we're talking about storytelling. There's a layer of complexity that goes on with storytelling. And then there's another mesh, there's another layer of data and data points that are, you know, all our consumers, all of our platforms are looking for additional information to supplement what they're looking at visually, you know, or that's just the way they consume that content. So it's important that we keep an open mind about the spectrum, because the spectrum is really going to be the key. How do we continue to reallocate, repurpose it, utilize it as those video workflows continue to get more complex?
So I'd like to actually ask each of you this question, and Ben, I'll start with you. So can you address, you know, what you're doing to get live signals out of heavily congested areas? And something that came up that I thought was interesting that you just touched on a second ago was, you know, Verizon Priority Service, FirstNet, and I think a couple of you had mentioned that in our pre-call. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And of course, we'll allow Tim to comment on that too.
Yeah, so, you know, this is the hardest thing about, you know, news gathering and deployment, and really you have to have experienced, smart people think about what you're going to send to that thing, right? So in some cases, you know, you're the first on site, and you don't have a satellite truck, or you don't have a microwave with you, so be it. But, you know, that's why we have, you know, the MMR vehicles with no satellite on it, and we kind of have Suburbans with satellite on it, and the microwave trucks, of course, and we have the big satellite trucks, and now we've got the FirstNet pucks, and we've got Verizon Priority also. So we've got all these tools, but you really got to, you know, what's the story? Where are you going? And we get caught sometimes because the bonded cellular works so great. Everyone just kind of goes out, but you don't think that it's like, oh, you know, there is going to be a throng of people there, and you're going to get caught, and then you're not going to be transmitting. So that's why we have to have all these tools still. You know, the teams in Kentucky told me in one spot, 0 Verizon, 0 FirstNet, and in another spot, you know, a mile away, everything was fine. And so, you know, Robert Ray is one of our Fox Weather correspondents, and he's completely by himself. And he is, you know, he's got a selfie stick, and he's got his iPhone, and he lives on the LU Smart app, and he does every live shot like that. Until yesterday, he couldn't do any of that. So, you know, you just have to have it available, and there's not going to be, I feel like, any real, you know, golden bullet. You're going to have all those tools.
Yeah, it's all about having a plan and using the right tool in the toolbox for the, you know, the type of situation, whether you're going into DC and you know that you're going to have saturated, you know, bandwidth. You know, you need to have options, and whether that's, you know, in many instances we've gone and bought, you know, cable modem subscriptions in certain areas and plug those into bonded cellular backpacks to have, you know, another potential path and increased bandwidth, or it's satellite because we know we're going into a, you know, a situation in DC where it's in lockdown and there's protests and there's going to be thousands of people. And again, 2 gig, you know, is reliable, and you get, you know, great distance out of it. So, you know, it's just all about going in and knowing the situation and playing to the situation and applying the technology for that particular situation.
Yeah, hey, actually, one quick follow-up for you. So, you know, we're talking about, you know, heavily crowded areas, but I know you're with your, you know, large number of stations. Obviously, some of them some of their coverage would be in, more rural areas where there may not be as much broadband and LTE. What are those stations doing?
We've actually found that even in most of the rural areas, as long as, they're not in some kind of, depressed terrain, that the cellular bandwidth is still enough. I mean, you only need about 4 megs for an HEVC out of bonded cellular. So most of the time it works. If not, then, you have to rely on those satellite trucks. And in most of our markets, we've got, teams that kind of know their areas, and they know, well, if we know we're going to this city and this area, that the cellular bandwidth's not going to work and the bonded cellular is not going to work. We've looked a little bit at Starlink and some other satellite providers. I don't think that technology is there yet, but yeah, it's kind of what we've been doing.
Interesting. Rich, how about you?
Well, the same, for something like that, I would probably want to rely on 2 gig. It's ours. And, if you're going to be responsible for that backhaul from the location back to the TV station, you want to make sure that you own that, right? You don't want to bring somebody the excuse that there was no cell coverage, and that's not something that's out of my control. I always feel, uncomfortable relying on somebody else if I'm going to be accountable for the final product. So for something like that, if again, you can't get the cell bandwidth out of there, you're going to fall back on either 2 gig or KU.
So for all of our photographers, we've got an iSat phone and a BGAN. So pretty much we can get out anywhere, anytime, which is a huge advantage. So that's nice for the, smaller affiliates. We've tried the extenders and, stronger antennas. We're testing an antenna for FirstNet air gain right now. It looks good on paper, but don't have any data yet on it in reality.
Okay. So to that point, Tim, what comments would you have as it relates to, Verizon Priority service and or, FirstNet?
Well, this starts to become, and I know this is a conversation that's been going on for quite some time, right? It becomes a little bit of a challenge, right? Because at some level, news reporting is a first responder event, depending on the story, right? At the same time, you have to rely on dedicated spectrum for health and safety. So it's kind of this really slippery slope that we go up against, when we try to care for what really ends up being almost on a case-by-case basis. I mean, you guys are out in the field, it's a best effort. That's why you carry so much different gear and tools inside the toolbox. But, at the end of the day, on one side, we want to be able to provide that coverage. So as in the Kentucky event, people know to seek shelter immediately. That becomes a leading edge of first responder opportunity to really, impact the community. On the same side of that, the coin, it can't be carte blanche, because then you have other things that happen that you really need the first responders to be completely, dedicated to that spectrum. So, I mean, we're very sensitive to it. We continue to look at it. I think there are ways that we can start to carve out something that's particular, but it's definitely just an ongoing discussion that we just need to get, wrestled down at this point.
I think the bonded cellular is a very seductive tool. We've all had great success with it. We've had some colossal failures too, but it doesn't mean that we need to ignore the other tools in our toolbox. We need to maintain our 2 gig sites, even our 450 megahertz, radios for IFB and for two-way communications. I mean, if you don't have queuing, you don't have a live shot.
Right. Yeah, I think for us, it's been a value to cost ratio for something like FirstNet or Verizon Priority. The bonded cellular has been so good that, why do I want to add any extra costs there? You're really getting the value out of it, for its use. So we've not gone into that direction so far.
Gotcha. Well, and it's like you've all have said, it's having a variety of tools in a toolbox, not really knowing what, you can't predict every situation. So you have to be ready for every situation. Well, I'd like to hit on a couple of topics that were mentioned in that conversation. So let's start with 5G. So Tim, I'd like to start with you on this one. Just, I guess more a general question. As 5G continues to roll out, the various bands, What do you see as the benefits to all of these folks and everyone?
Well, as I was talking about before in spectrum management, 5G in the next iterations, you're going to see network slicing. It's going to give us that opportunity to start to isolate, very specific spectrum within the 5G radios. And that will give us the opportunity to create very specific QoS. And when we talk about access to different type of workflows, that's certainly going to be very important. We're working with a lot of the cellular bonding companies, and we're utilizing them in terms of testing out how the 5G impact, and what we're seeing, at least in the lab and certainly out in the field, is that the latency that we're actually able to create is so super low. It's super impressive of what will happen. So you've got a couple of things I think that are happening simultaneously, and we all know that look, 5G is continuing to roll out. Certainly the products we have when we talk about ultra wideband and nationwide, they're two very different variations of the definition of 5G, and we know the other carriers that are in the space also have different variations of the definitions of the spectrum definition and the clinical definition, I'll say, of what 5G is. But as we continue to saturate those environments, and as more C-band becomes available as well, we're going to see continued reallocation, reuse in the management of that spectrum to address all these different video use cases. I think what we're also discovering as we bring more of it into our laboratory and start testing out things, and I welcome any of you guys, and we talk with all you guys all the time. So, but what we're finding is that there are some very interesting, what you wouldn't expect as kind of a primary use case for 5G. I think even Kurt touched a little bit about pushing, graphic material, in the prior discussion out to the edge, right? So when you start to think about some of the things you can do with multi-axis edge compute, and what are the impacts of having that type of compute at the edge while you're trying to do news gathering and news reporting, it all of a sudden starts to change, some of the way we execute. So I think there's a lot there's certainly a lot that's happening. It's certainly we're very early in this market in terms of maturity and development. And I think we're just going to continue to see, the proliferation of new tool sets, new acquisition, new 5G enabled technology that'll be native, and some of that impact that you're going to see, especially around cameras and other equipment, and that will continue to improve that base, and that's where we're going to start to see the real, I'll say, penetration and the usage of those tools as part of a daily production environment.
Yeah, I think the C-band is going to be the key there, because you get kind of the best of both worlds. You get, some features of the millimeter, you get some features of the 700 megahertz, and the QoS is certainly going to be a big piece of that, because in some of the initial testing we've done with 5G, it's not much different than 4G. So we need that C-band to sort of give you some wider channels and give you some more spectrum there to work with.
Yeah, and listen, recognize too, 5G is really because we're in an upload business. 5G is really built as a download spectrum, and so yes, when we're struggling with take the megabits of the stream that you're pushing up, you're competing at a smaller opportunity than the network was built for.
I think that's the thing that a lot of the layman broadcasters don't understand. Is it's an asynchronous system where it's very possible to get 30 megabit a second download, but when you want to upload that content, and that's what we all need to do, right? We need to send video from the field to the station. Counting on 1 megabit a second for a device, that's about what you can expect. That, why we have bonded cellular.
I'm much more interested in QoS, and if 5G equals QoS, then I'm in. But until that time, I just wish I could get 500 kilobits QoS from anybody, but I can't. But one day maybe.
So Tim, so Verizon ultra wideband, that's the millimeter wave, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What's the rollout of that look like?
So, we are continuing to, penetrate, if you look at where we are, we're in mostly large markets. That's how our rollout schedule is going. We're going to continue to saturate those markets. You know, if you look pattern wise, it's a lot of NFL cities and then tertiary cities beyond that. And you're going to continue to see that rollout. But to Ernie's point, as C-band becomes more readily available, it kind of helps us accelerate. And although it doesn't have the same characteristics of ultra wideband, it does give us, somewhere in the middle and, better propagation in terms of the signal. And so I think, I think that what we're going to end up seeing, and I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier about spectrum management, is we're going to continue to see there are use cases that are very LTE oriented. There are use cases that are very ultra wideband oriented, and there will be use cases that are very C-band oriented. And then it's going to be, how do you manage all of that different spectrum for that use case and that QoS to deliver, for whatever that workflow is.
Gotcha. Okay, so I think Ernie, you'd also mentioned low Earth orbit satellites and high speed internet. What testing have you done there? What have you seen?
I'm still waiting for my Starlink to appear.
So when you're looking to test Starlink, is that, I'm assuming, is that more rural areas that you would?
Yeah, it'd be rural areas, and from the tests that I've seen, it's very promising. As opposed to Hughes or some of the other ones, the latency is much lower. We're getting good. I've seen 50 megs download. I've seen over 30 to 40 megs upload. So there's some promising features there. It's just not available widely yet. So,
do you see it more as fixed usage, or do you feel like it could be something that could be?
I think it could be mobilized. Obviously, we're going to have to test there and see, again, all of the bonded cellular is very good at compression, and you don't need a lot to make it work successfully. It's back to that latency question. As long as the latency is under 50 milliseconds or so, I think it can work for bonded cellular, but, we're going to have to see what the test results really are and see if those sort of beta tests that they've been doing, if those are real world, and if it's consistent real world, because obviously it can't be 50 milliseconds today latency and tomorrow, or hit and miss of 300 millisecond or more latency. So as long as that is consistent, I think it has potential good use for complementing the bonded cellular.
It is amazing the development that has gone into bonded cellular over the last 4 years. I mean, I think all of the manufacturers have really stepped up. They have made some incredible leaps forward in both controlling latency and more efficient encoders. Would all of you agree? I mean, it's pretty amazing how far they've jumped in just a few years.
Yeah, we haven't tested Starlink yet either. I've heard good things. I think the movement of the low Earth orbit, and there not being enough satellites up there yet. I think there's been some dropouts I've been hearing. I'm sure it'll get there as soon as they launch another few hundred, satellites. But I love gobs of bandwidth at a pretty small terminal anywhere in the world at a really low cost. So it sounds very promising.
Curious to see what happens when the people who have designed the bonded cellular systems start using the LEO satellites. I mean, it does sound pretty promising.
Would you replace your BGANs at that point, you think?
Yes, absolutely. And the Chimeta, I've seen it in NAB, year after year after year, and I've seen those little cells that are on top of the car. And it looks like it's just the roof of the car. When it gets there, I feel like it's really going to be something.
I also want to touch on mobile apps. So Ben, I'll start with you on this one. So can you tell us how heavily your journalists rely on mobile phone apps for live video, and if that's increased, and the adaption of that's become more so through the pandemic?
Yeah. So we started off, every single field producer, reporter, photographer had the LU Smart app. That was our starting point. And, no one ever used it. You forgot how to use it. You didn't have the right version. You didn't have the settings right. It was-
Logins, they didn't have logins.
Yeah, the logins. Like, oh no, it's like right when something happens, it's like, okay, great. So that pandemic did force everybody to, call up and get all their settings right and working. So also during the pandemic, we launched a test with Video Call Center. I see Larry and Bonnie are here. And, that's been really good to eliminate all those things I just talked about, because it's just, you send the link to somebody and they click on it and then they have return video and we see them. So, that was another, enabling technology that we launched during the pandemic. That was huge. And it's, just about, simplicity, and that was it. And that was very helpful.
I think the pandemic was the linchpin in solidifying that as a tool, because, we have found, Sinclair's got 70 some news producing stations across the country, thousands of journalists that, whether it's a producer, and they use it for everything. We had meteorologists working off of iPads at home, and we were actually keying that. Didn't look great, but it still got us on the air. Weather people doing weather from home. Anchors, started out doing, before we could mobilize enough to put some better transmission capabilities into, people's homes and various spaces, or, remote spaces. That was the most invaluable tool. They would just prop it up on a little mount, and reporters, they were doing it from cars, they were doing it from home. So it was actually a pretty big lifesaver. We were using file transfer from it. They were shooting video with them. So they were a great usage in COVID.
I have to agree. It was a game changer. And I think we tried things that we never would have thought would be acceptable for television because of the pandemic. And I also have to give credit to our engineers at all the TV stations for being ready to try this stuff and being ready for the challenge. I mean, I think all of us would agree that our engineering departments really did an incredible job just with their creativity and finding these methods of getting our content on the air.
Here.
Yeah, a lot of quick
We're
innovations
all
happening.
for more cellular apps, just so you know. Shameless plug, I got it, but.
Ben, I'd like to, we talked a little bit about in our pre-call about, Fox Weather. We heard from the Fox Weather folks earlier today in regards to how the journalists, it's my understanding there's a network of cameras that they utilize. Do you mind speaking a little bit about how live acquisition's happening for that, new online entity?
Yeah. Similarly, we kind of, compressed the photographer's kit and, made it a smaller camera and a smaller live view. And, I mentioned it earlier, as I was watching, I downloaded the app, I started watching it, and then I saw Robert Ray on there and I was like, who's his photographer? That's a cool show. Oh, they're really moving a lot. That's interesting. And then I called him and he said, I'm alone and I'm always alone. And he's using a selfie stick and he was using the Live View app. And it was, I feel like he gets a little bit more, or less pushback, or it's a little bit more intimate, the interviews he has, because he just has the selfie stick or just has the iPhone. So, I did say he's on FirstNet, and he has, Verizon also. So he has multiple networks, and he's got a FirstNet puck as well. But, to that point, it didn't always work. And when you find that situation and he does not have a BGAN or a sat phone or a satellite dish, because he is very nimble, he's got to, drive another hour down this, or a mile down the street to go find cellular connectivity and do a live shot or transmit something in. But they've been deploying a little bit differently for Fox Weather, and they are, I would say, more nimble, and it gets them, to the location a little bit faster because of that.
Gotcha. Very interesting. Rich, so speaking of innovation through the pandemic, have come up with a very clever ingest setup for your live crews. Do you mind kind of explaining what you built out?
Sure, it's a low-tech solution, but it worked. I noticed coming into work just about every day, our photographers and talent editing in their crew cars. And, I just thought we can do better. And, a couple weeks after the pandemic, that's acceptable. But, as time goes on, we really have to find a better solution than that. And what they were doing is either, with a puck or just standard LTE, editing, uploading their video through LTE or downloading any content they needed from the newsroom, usually transferring through Dropbox or some other cloud application. What we did was we just extended the newsroom LAN connections into our garage so that photographers could actually connect to the editing LAN. They could have their iNews and also get content quickly. So instead of waiting 45 minutes for an upload, now an upload would take maybe 2 or 3 minutes. They could finish their story and then get back out on the road again, which is, what photographers want to do. They want to grab as much content as possible. So that really, that worked out quite well until somebody decided to extend one of those connections out to the street. And InfoSec people don't like that. We shut down pretty quickly.
Thank you. I think that's a really cool setup. Security. So, Ben, I'll start with you on this one. What security issues have you seen as it relates to live remote setups, and how have you addressed them?
So, like I said before, we tested a lot of technologies. We stuck in, I won't name any names. We stuck in 4 boxes. And this past Friday, InfoSec called and said there were 29 vulnerabilities with it. So shut it down. So I think, we worked with IT and InfoSec to install it, but still things fall through the cracks. I think, it's more work. It's something you got to do up front. It slows down the deployment. It slows down the operations and a little bit. But I think the long story short is the InfoSec team is your friend, and you really got to get them involved early on and often, and then repeat, because like we said, this was 6 months down the line. And with the Log4j, we're reaching out to everybody and their mother. So it's just something that it's a reality. And obviously that I think the Sinclair ransomware, taught us a little something. So
that was
learned a
not
little
caused
something.
by any field operation. Let's make that clear. But they are conversations that we are now having more often, very frequently, with field crews, and it's a conversation that has to happen continuously about how to keep their content safe and their laptops safe, and every piece of equipment that they use, because obviously that content is valuable, and if it's compromised, you have no use to it. But I think our challenge is the blend between how do you stay operational in the field, and how are you locked down so much that you can't operate because of, IT has a penchant for wanting to create very strict policies, and it creates a very difficult environment, from a technology perspective. We just want the crews to be successful and be able to, transmit their material and get the content back. And IT is kind of on the other side of things, where we want to keep them completely protected. So it's always a balance of, how do you stay protected? How do you get all your content and your streams and everything back to the station?
Thank you.
I have one question from the audience,
course.
Mike, if I can relay that. The question is, where does satellite IP fit into your news gathering and DR plans? Is latency, QoS, or bandwidth most important?
Yes.
It depends what you're doing. If
It's
you're
all
live,
three of them.
latency is an issue. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, finish.
If you're live, latency is obviously an issue, and it's not just the latency from your location back to the studio, but it's that return feed as well. Because any return feed, the latency going to the studio is going to be added to that return feed. So if you're going to try and do, let's say, live weather, and you've got somebody looking at a chroma key and they're trying to point to something, and then a second later they see their arm move, it's very difficult for a meteorologist to do a live weather report with a chroma key if they've got 1.5 seconds of latency. Doesn't matter how much bandwidth you have.
So we've got satellite IP in basically every satellite truck, and we're building more and more and more of them, on kind of, suburban chassis. So it's a big component. And usually what we'll do is if something does happen, that truck rolls up to that station and they start providing that satellite IP. The latency, yes, bandwidth is difficult, and it's difficult to acquire enough KU space that will equate to what a newsroom might need. So it's definitely a challenge, but something that we're actively working on.
Well, thank you all, gentlemen. Really appreciate that. I'm going to ask you to just sit tight for just one moment because I've got Kathy Haley here with Brian Hopman from APENPS.
Thank you, guys.
Quick shout out to Dave Cyrak at Cox Media Group for giving us the idea for that panel. Our networking break is going to be sponsored by one of my favorite journalistic organizations, the Associated Press, and APENPS. Brian Hopman is the Vice President and General Manager of ENPS. What's been going on with your company, very briefly, and your customers? What challenges are you solving?
Thanks very much, Kathy, and nice job, everybody who's been out here today. So just a couple of quick things. We spend a lot of time with technologists, with newsroom leaders, and with newsroom users. And for us, the huge focus is productivity. So we're tackling enhanced productivity for our customers using our playbook planning system, which has, for our newsroom, saved thousands of hours just this year alone. We've used it to help us assemble some of the state and the regional digests that we send out to customers on our wire services. And then we've extended that out to customers who are using that system. And a couple of the bigger ones that we brought online this past year are the Daily Mail Group and Al Jazeera. And we're looking ahead to some more growth activity there. There's been a lot said today about security, and that's top of mind for us as well. We're the first of the major newsroom systems that we know of to bring out multi-factor authentication and single sign-on. So it's making it easier for the journalists to not need to VPN in, and keeping also, I think, the InfoSec teams happy, since we can secure those networks just a wee bit more. And we're looking ahead to a busy 22. We've got about 20 different new sites that are already scheduled to bring ENPS into their environments for the first time. So we're excited. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
very
Brian.
much. Now we're having our networking break. Thank you, Brian Hopman.
Thanks to
of
our panelists. Thanks so
APENPS.
much.